Thank you very much, Professor Dershowitz. I'm afraid I prepared the presentation will support what you have said and will raise further question. The topic I was asked to talk about is Israeli legitimacy, branding, nation branding in the case of Israel, how branding can affect our legitimacy. So before I go into the branding, legitimacy in the international discourse is confused, is misused. The term replaces really legal discourse. When people talk about legitimacy, they really refer to the word lexus, which is law. And there's a lot of semantic ambiguity in the use of the word legitimacy. And our good friend Goldstone report on Kosovo wrote, NATO military intervention was illegal but legitimate. So it just shows you how ambiguous the word legitimacy is. And most papers really link legitimacy with international law. And there are really three conceptual elements which are emphasized in international literature on legitimacy. The first one is legal legitimacy, which has to do with legal validation of by international bodies. The second one is moral legitimacy, which is the exercise of one power by one actor over another actor, like Israel and Palestinians, which is termed democratic legitimacy. And the third one is social legitimacy, which has to do with how the actors themselves, in our case the Palestinians, view the system, whether the system is morally or legally legitimate. As you know, I think Israel in the international literature doesn't do well on any of these three parameters. And the principal reason for this is that Israel does not have internationally recognized borders. Not only that, but we don't have an internal consensus on a two-state solution within the Israeli government. And this is our biggest problem, the fact that the world does not recognize Israel's borders. It has a strong effect on our legitimacy. On the 22nd of February this year, a letter was published in Iton Haaretz by 22 Knesset members, 7 of which are deputy ministers, Sganei Sarim, and the subject was fear of building freeze. What they wrote to the Prime Minister: these days we receive news that Israel is demanded to put a freeze on construction and planning of settlements in Judea and Samaria. We strongly oppose a freeze of any kind anywhere, and I emphasize anywhere. And we shall consider such an Israeli obligation as a breaking of the rules. These are 22 members of the Israeli Knesset, 7 of them deputy ministers. Benjamin Netanyahu appointed in 2012 a committee headed by an ex-Supreme Court Justice Edmond Levy to study whether Israel settlements in the West Bank are legitimate or not. And this committee wrote, Israel's hold of the territories is legitimate according to international law, based on Lord Balfour Declaration of 1917, and the fact that in 1948 UN Resolution 181 was never adopted by the Palestinians. Israel is not an occupying force in the 67 territories, and according to international law, Israel has the right to settle in these areas. I'm not disputing, I'm just saying this was the decision, and you can hear a lot of Israeli international lawyers justify this decision. However, unfortunately, this position was really not accepted by the international community, and we have the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, on 20th January this year, told the Security Council, Palestinians must be able to realize their legitimate aspirations to statehood, self-determination and freedom, including the end of occupation that has begun in 1967. 2014 will be decisive in helping Israelis and Palestinians draw back from a perilous and unsustainable status quo. This is the position of the international community, that the current situation is unsustainable, and it's the Israeli position that it's legitimate to settle anywhere is not acceptable by the international community. The Israeli Foreign Office, MFA, puts great emphasis and invests a lot of money in trying to brand Israel innovation startup nation, and they hired a PR company in London, and they came up with slogan, Israel, land of creation, and you see that Israel is painted there with many, many colors, because they wanted to show also that Israel is full of colors, pluralism, which it is. So they chose this kind of slogan and colors to present a different view of Israel. The question that I want to pose is, can nation branding efforts help Israel obtain international legitimacy? Well, countries integrate branding techniques into public diplomacy to improve legitimacy. We did not invent this idea. And one of the top experts on international branding, Professor Sam Anholt from the UK, who does run one of the survey groups in the world, he said, we in the UK call it nation branding, public diplomacy, because we want it to sound posh and we don't want anybody to think that it's more of a spin-obsessed PR. This is what he said about policy-based branding. There are really three major global survey groups who study how nations are perceived by the world population. The first one is the National Branding Index, run by this Simon Anholt. And they study along different criteria. They run annual surveys, and they really care about the political image of a country. Another survey group is the BBC, which every year runs an international poll in about 25 countries, and they poll the general population to see how people perceive a certain country. And the third one is Country Brand Index, which does more surveys among professionals to study really the commercial image, which Professor Dershowitz correctly said, the commercial image of Israel is much better in the world than the political one, which I will show you in a minute. Professor, the last time that NBI have surveyed Israel, the National Branding Index, in 1906, he said Israel brand is by a considerable margin the most negative we have ever measured in the NBI and comes at the bottom of ranking on almost every question. Why do I bother you with a survey from 2006? Because the BBC has been running this kind of questionnaire ever since, and I have here a summary of surveys from 2010 until 2013, and the BBC asked the general population in different countries a question: do you consider the influence of these countries to be positive or negative? And the results are quite sad for Israel. And they do it, by the way, together with the University of Maryland. It's a joint project of the two. And unfortunately, as you can see here, in 2010, we are right where Simon Anholt puts us in 2006. I put an arrow near Israel. The world population, the sample, views Israel 21% as mainly positive, 49% as mainly negative, and then 30% are neutral. And I emphasize this because I will come back to it later. In the survey in 2013, again, Israel is 21 positive, didn't change, but the negative rose to 52% view us in the world population view us as a mainly negative influence on the world, which is quite alarming. But the BBC also is doing the same kind of survey country by country, and this is very interesting. You see here the change how different countries perceive us. Fortunately, in the United States, the positive view from 2010 to 13 have risen from 43 to 51%, and the negative decreased. But this is the only trend that we saw a positive improvement. In Canada, which is a close ally of Israel, we've seen increase from 52 negative to 57 negative. In Russia, we increased the Russian population sample. We increased from 17% negative to 32, a rise of 15%. Israel was very happy last week to hear Australia decide that Jerusalem will not be called anymore an occupied territory. Hurrah, we were very happy, the first country to break this ice. But if you look at the population of Australia, in 2010 we were 58 negative, and in 2013 we had 69% of the Australian view us as a negative influence on the world. And I anticipated in democratic countries, in the long run, as Professor Dershowitz has said, in the long run, it will affect, it had negative sentiments by the general population, will affect democratic governments. So what happened in Australia last week should not really sway us. In any case, we've seen that from 2010 to 2013, there was an increase of 3%, and the majority of the world, of the samples that was surveyed, 52% view us as a negative influence on the world. Another survey group is the Country Brand Index. They they don't survey. By the way, I didn't say that, as you can see, in both years, Israel is grouped together with Pakistan and Iran and North Korea, like in 2006 in the survey of National Brand Index. So we see continuity from 2006 to until 2013 in the negative sentiment of the world towards Israel. The CBI, the Country Brand Index, study the commercial image. And they don't ask general population, but they ask experts in different countries their view about Israel, and along 5 criteria: values, tourism, quality of life, and good for business, and heritage. And here we are doing much better. We are ranked 27 among 118 countries. So commercially speaking, Israel is doing apparently a decent job. We are successful in conveying to the world that we are innovative countries, and we have a good economy. And I think our economy is witness to that. The question is, can nation branding really affect our legitimacy? This is the question I started with. And if you look at the BBC surveys, as I mentioned before, there are 27 in average along the years who said that they have a not negative or not positive view towards Israel. They are neutral. And this is a big group. So if you can reach these people and tell them that Israel is not only a problem, Israel is a solution, our innovations solve people's problems. If you can reach this group, it's a good group, and I think it makes a good case for Israeli efforts in branding us along the innovation, the land of creation. So I think it does have merit to do that. We here, we not only talk about this, we do. In our School of Communication, I'm the Dean of the School of Communication here. 3 years ago, we created a website called nocampus.com, in which we tell the world, about Israeli innovations that can solve your problems. You see here, drawing a citizen who never heard about Israel, present a problem, treatment of Alzheimer. And ask Google, is there any solution for Alzheimer? Google will refer this query to our No Campus website, and this guy will, if there is an Israeli solution, this guy will get an Israeli innovation, and then he will see, hey, Israel solved my problem. And I can tell you that we have 20,000 friends in Facebook. We have friends from Iran. We have friends from Pakistan, from Gaza. During the last war in Gaza, we got an email. We hate your weapons, but we love your innovations. So I think we reach about 20 million people around the world with innovations that solve people's problems. So we do believe it has value. But I want to now pour some cold water on what I just said. 2 years ago, Mr. Alan Rosenstein, who was the CEO of BBDO, the international advertising company, and was considered one of the 100 by Advertising Age as the 100 leaders of the world of advertising in the 20th century. And he was here, and we had a similar discussion, and this is what he had to say. All of Israel's great achievements, social, political, economic, educational, medical, cannot counter the growing perception of Israeli hegemony and militarism. Perceptions is reality. It is tempting to think of this as a branding problem, but it belittles it. Unless and until Israel promotes coherent, consistent policies on the establishment of a Palestinian state, Israel's image in the world will continue to decline to a point of threatening its very existence. And I'm talking about a very good Jew, loves Israel, and a frequent visitor to Israel, and this is very alarming. He says, it's a political problem, it's a policy problem, it's a leadership problem. And Simon Alholt, the expert on nation branding, said, politics of a nation can affect every single aspect of a person's perception about a country. To succeed in permanently changing the country's image, the country has to be prepared to change its behavior. Now, I have a problem with the title of this session. The title was BDS, Nuisance or Strategic Threat. I think Professor Dershowitz did say that BDS is a long-term real threat to Israel. And I want to suggest an alternative. The title is Lack of Government Borders Strategy, Nuisance or Strategic Threat. I think the lack of border strategy, and I'm not saying action, I'm not saying leave the areas tomorrow morning. I'm saying have a borders policy that the government is agreed upon. Unless it has a policy, a strategy on borders, I'm afraid that Alan Ronstein is right and Professor Dershowitz is right. We do have a long-term problem, and to fight with BDS, with all sorts of... they cannot meet Professor Dershowitz every corner. There are few Professor Dershowitz around the world who are willing to really speak on our behalf like that. So we do have a policy problem, in my opinion, if we want to ensure a long-term democratic and Jewish state. Thank you very much.